Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Are we good to start officially?
Just real quick, if you have an empty seat next to you, could you raise your hand for me? We've got somebody will look in. And keep your hand raised as long as there's an empty seat. Thank you guys. So sorry. All right, how many seats are over there?
There's a 3 over here, I think. Yeah.
Is Julio in the room? Good. I told him not to come.
Over here, yeah. Oh, gosh.
Is the blender guru in the room? Oh, well, I told him to come. He's in trouble.
Awesome. I guess we're officially a full house now.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we can just start.
Yeah.
Guys, thanks for showing up. I'm Marco Bucci,
I'm Tiffanie Mang.
and we kind of have the same brain, so we decided to join forces and just talk about, well, things that we do in our paintings that work. We've got 3 things that we've structured. The first is the structure of a painting. The next is shapes and values. The third is color. We are going to set timers because the most impossible thing to do is keep an artist on track. So I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. We're going to talk about structure. We're just going to go back and forth. Also, if the AI artists wanted to take over the world, they would blow up LightBox right now because every artist would be gone. This is amazing to be here, and it's an honor that you guys are joining us for the chat.
Yeah, really.
Okay, I've set the timer for 10 minutes.
All right.
Up on the screen is 2 paintings that I did. The left is a watercolor painting. On the right is a book cover. They're very different. The watercolor was about 45 minutes. The book cover was several hours of work, maybe a few days of work. It's actually a lot more detailed than it looks on the screen if you zoom in. But they're the same painting fundamentally, and I want to show you why. You guys are all artists. You probably are way ahead of me. Here it is in black and white. Here it is even further simplified. You guys have probably noticed what's going on here. That's the painting. Now, the thing that always amazes me about art is it's so hard to do, but intellectually it can be so easy. My 3-year-old daughter can draw a triangle, and that's all that painting is. And kind of a theme about painting structure is it's so easy to overcomplicate things, but really the thing that drives a good painting, not just these, any good painting, is a simple idea that is underlying everything, that drives you with each step. With each step you can say, hey, it's a triangle. Hey, it's a triangle. You can remind yourself. So how am I using the triangle? Let me go back to the beginning. There's 2 kind of different ways I'm using it. One, in the watercolor painting, within the triangle is the focal point. Kind of the most contrast is in that area. It's that building that you're looking at. In the Jungle Book one, which Disney didn't print, by the way, they went with the movie poster instead. I was really mad about that. Anyway, in the other Jungle Book one, the triangle, there's 2 sort of focal points. You got Bagheera on the top and Mowgli on the bottom. They occupy both ends of the triangle. I'll give you just one more thing, Tiffanie.
Go for it.
Yeah, so when you use, so this is another one of my paintings. This one is a curve. It's a C curve. The focal point is the characters. They exist on the curve. It's just a C curve, and along that curve is your focal point. Let me just show you one more image, and then Tiffanie can talk about some of her ideas about structure. In the other artist category. You can look at this is by Paul Felix, one of my all-time favorite artists. It's also a curve. You got this little S curve running through the picture, right? That's a structural, simple idea that a 3-year-old can understand. But on that curve is the focal point. The focal point being maybe this hut, and then maybe a secondary focal point being the mountain in the back. They lie on the curve. All this stuff that's outside the curve, you notice, and we'll talk about this when we get into shapes and values and color, he's downplayed it. So focal points and how you curate your focal point That's what drives structure. Think of a simple shape or a simple curve or something that brings you through the painting as a simple idea for structure. Put your focal point somewhere in that structure, and you're good to go. Tiffanie has some thoughts on how she does it.
I think that's a perfect lead into what I'm going to talk about design. So what Marco and I both believe is that design is the core foundation. Kind of think of it as like the framework of a building. A lot of people love to focus on color. A lot of people, and they think color is what will tie a painting together. And I like to kind of argue with that and say, if you don't have design, which is the vehicle that will drive your story in your painting, your image could be an image, but it might be kind of empty. So let me actually backtrack a little bit. Actually, I'll just stick with this image right now. This might be kind of new for you guys, and I'm not going to go into detail. I taught a workshop earlier about grids and design earlier this year, but how I have lately been using design using grids to help design my paintings is with 3 kinds of grids. And you can see here, actually I'll pull that up really quick before I pull up the Emil Carlsen painting. You have the rule of thirds grid, division of thirds, which you can see in the center one here in the yellow. But what you guys might not know or have heard about is the centerline grid on the left here and the diamond grid, which is the green one. So there, you kind of see them all coming in together. And so these grids can really help you organize and structure your painting with simple shapes like Marco was just talking about. Simplicity is always key to a better design. Would you
Why are
agree
the
or
lines
not?
orange and blue?
Oh, so the orange is just to show, so the first one is the center line grid, and then the orange is just to show the separation
Okay, what's
for
the
the
blue
rule
one?
of thirds, and then the blue one or the green one is the diamond grid. So,
But what do you do with the blue grid?
what do I do? Yes, I'm going to get right into that. So, for example, the center line grid on the left, you can see here, it basically helps you mark where your center is. So you know where your center is, and you know how you can design around that. And the diagonals here, as you can see, help you sort of be able to know where to place things in the halves of your canvas. Everyone knows about the rule of thirds, and the rule of thirds provides you. Can you guys all see my cursor here? The rule of thirds helps you kind of give you alternate placements for your focal point besides the center area. Now, I don't know about you, Marco, but we've always been taught, like, don't ever put things in the center.
Yeah,
But
that's BS.
Yeah, but sometimes you can, and sometimes it's very helpful to know where the center is, and these grids help you with that. And lastly, the diamond grid here basically sort of helps you know where to put everything within that sort of green area, and everything outside, like what Marco talked about, Paul Felix's piece, might be secondary. So your phone went off, Marco, but I don't know how much more time I have.
We have 4 minutes.
4 minutes, all right. You guys might know Emil Carlsen. He is one of my favorite painters. He does beautiful still lifes and beautiful landscape paintings, and they're kind of different from obviously animation paintings. His paintings are very beautifully structured and designed, and as you can see, I laid the grids on top, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well, Marco. But what is the first thing that you guys see instantly?
The grid.
The grid? yeah, of course, besides that. How about the way he placed things? He placed the tree literally right in the middle very intentionally. And one thing about structure that Marco and I both love to talk about is placing and designing things with intention. Mm-hmm. Instead of just throwing shapes around, why are you placing that shape there? Why are you designing it with, a C or S curve or, triangles or squares or whatever simple shapes you may be building your design with? I could go into this piece a lot because I have analyzed this piece, but for one thing, he placed that tree right in the center, and then all the light and dark shapes you can see are semi-designed and hitting the lines where the diagonals are, extending here and hitting that area there. And he's creating beautiful C curves and beautiful straights as well. You can see the diagonal here exactly hits the top rule of thirds and then goes to the bottom rule of thirds. So things like that and intentional designing is really important to study.
It's kind of like a seatbelt for composition. Like,
Yeah.
I don't use grids. I never. I'm not saying they're useless. I just never use them. But I do have very similar thoughts on that. Let me show you. Oops, sorry. This is kind of my guidebook to how I compose and think about shapes in a painting. You're working within a frame, obviously. A frame has finite space. everyone here has heard big, medium, small shapes. You got big, medium, small as 3 categories of shapes. You see them as on the top. A big shape is big. You only have room for a few of them in your painting. So you should have fewer big shapes in your painting. In the painting Tiffanie just showed, if you can remember it, like the curve, the straight of the landscape, that big grassy area, that was a big shape. And that was maybe in the sky was a big shape. And that might have been it in that painting. Have just a few big shapes. Then your medium shapes are a bit smaller, so you can have more of them in your painting. And then your small shapes, being the smallest, you can just populate those around your painting like crazy. Now, this is not a mathematical diagram. I'm not trying to say for every one big shape you have 5 medium shapes. Don't take it literally like that. It's just this is the ratio that works. The bottom painting is just an abstract little doodle that I did that shows how interest is created with this shape structure. Now, excuse me. Tiffany's grids will help you have sort of a...
They're guidance, but they're not meant to be like a strict rule.
Exactly. But the idea is, going with the center thing, you can put something in the middle of your painting so long as you're not just symmetrical with everything. You can see in my composition here, the shapes are distributed in an asymmetrical way, and the noise that's created from the small shapes and the medium shapes is what adds interest to the big shapes. But the big shapes are what cement your painting. So if you look at like that big rectangle shape that I'm outlining here in the middle, that might be sort of the focal area, right? But the cool thing is, like, we have X-ray vision for this stuff. The medium shapes and small shapes overlap the big shape, but the identity of the big shape remains. It doesn't go away just because you overlap things. I've been a teacher for like 13 years, and one of the things I see so often in student work, and I had a portfolio review yesterday, I talked to almost everyone about it, is people are afraid to overlap things. But in real life, things overlap all the time. Like, I'm standing in front of this wall, hiding some of these logos. But as artists, because we're so precious about what we draw, or the tendency is to be so precious, the following tendency is to not overlap your things because you want to show it off. But definitely overlap. Have shapes overlap your bigger shapes. Smaller shapes overlap the medium shapes. That's what creates interest in the composition. If you have that, you can place things anywhere because suddenly you have a system for understanding how the interest is created in your paintings.
Can I just say one last thing for 3 seconds? When you overlap, you also have create the ability to create contrast between your shapes, right? When you put 2 things together, the eye sees them and is able to compare them. So in Marco's thing, which is a great lead into shapes, by the way,
exactly.
which is next, shapes and value, you can contrast those smaller, I guess you would say, like he said, noise on top of that bigger kind of lopsided rectangle that he has in the background.
Exactly. And if you look at like Craig Mullins here, it's a straight. You can probably use Tiffany's grids to exactly identify the same sort of thirds thing. It's a diagonal. That's the sort of structure that we're talking about. And then you can see how it's almost like the grass is a big shape, the sky is a big shape. But if you look at the lighter, sorry, I should point with my cursor. You look at the lighter sky, those are smaller shapes that are on top of the bigger sky shape. These little things, these artillery sort of things that are sticking out, those are medium and small shapes that overlap the sky, creating interest. But the overall structure, this big triangular diagonal arrow shape, roots the painting. So think about rooting the painting with a big shape or like a path, some kind of C curve or S curve, and then overlapping it with medium and small shapes to create that noise, that abstract interest.
And actually using this painting, if I could
yeah.
riff off of that, I don't know what you think about this, Marco, but I have actually lately, and I'm going to pull up some beautiful Alfonso Mucha examples, but I realized for me, distinguishing kind of what the difference between a mass and a shape is. For example, in this painting, you could say the sky, regardless of the light hitting it, is a mass. And then the grass, like Marco said, is a mass. And you could, when you squint, right, the silhouette of the cannons and the soldiers could be another mass.
Right, like mass is separated by value.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Like little value changes.
Yes, that would be shapes almost.
Right, like a little value change still feels like they belong in a group. So like the sky has little value changes, minus the big light behind the soldiers there.
Yes.
But like this area here, this is a mass, because even though the little value changes, they feel like they belong. It's like you can easily pass between values. They allow for easy passage of your eye. Let's talk about shapes and values.
Yeah.
Let me see here. Oh, sorry guys. Finicky computer. Let me go here, shapes and values. Okay. I'll just open up with, when I was first learning painting, a guy named Morgan Weisling taught me this, and it revolutionized my work because everything suddenly became so simple. you have a light and shadow family. As painters, we paint light. You guys all know this. That's what you're painting. You're painting the light, hitting forms. That's what makes form look like form, is the light. So you have a light and shadow family. In those families, you have certain values. Now, number one rule, never cross the fence line, I call it. Think of light and shadow as families, this being the fence line. Light and shadow families don't like each other. They fight. You can't cross the fence with your values, meaning your light values should be lighter than your shadow values. So even the darkest light value should always be lighter than the lightest shadow value within the same object.
And can I just add that going back to structure, the first step we like to encourage students is that before you even start thinking about color, figure out what is in your light and what is in your shadow. If you don't know what that is and you haven't figured that out, your painting will probably fall apart. And that is the problem. I don't know about you, but that is like 3/4 of the time I see in student work why the painting isn't reading.
Oh, that's the number one thing. So like the average value would be something, the average light value, would just be like, it doesn't matter what the value is, just something in the light. Fine, just pick anything. And then switch to your average shadow and put that in. Halftone is a tricky one. It's this face here.
But it's still in the light.
It's still in the light. Halftone is still in the light. Halftone is it's a kind of a classical art name. Halftone is unfortunately named because it's not halfway between your light and shadow. Halftone is closer to the light. Because if you think about, just make light shine on your body right now and just look where it's turning. The shadow is much darker than anything in the light. But as the light starts to turn into shadow, it gets just a hair darker. That's halftone. You want to make sure your halftone is close to the light. Now, I just have, let me go back to Sargent here, which is in the structure folder.
The shapes.
Yeah, and we'll get into some shapes too. So that's a Sargent study sketch I did digitally, but it's based on this. So average light is all this stuff, this light gray stuff. Halftone is this, and look how much lighter that halftone is than the shadow, which is all here, right? And then the highlight is the lightest thing. And then all you got to do, if you have that structure, your edges just create the hard and softness between those shapes. But you should always be thinking about the shape, regardless of what your style of art is. Like, I'm a very painterly artist. This image is not painterly. It's like a graphic design. But this is the simplest way I can understand this picture. Then you add edges. And Tiffanie, 1 second, you can take it from there. I want to show you. Hang on.
And I wanted to add on with that Sargent study that Marco had up, he was still sticking to simple lines and simple shapes created from C curves, S curves, and straights. And every time you feel like your design's falling apart, I always find it helpful to just go back to those basic straights and curves.
Yeah, like when you're making a shape, you basically have C curves, S curves, straights. A straight, a C curve, an S curve. And you can make the S curve like this or like this. Stick to those three. It makes beautiful shapes. Morgan Weisling showed me a school yearbook. We all have high school yearbooks, right? The faces are the size of a pea, yet you can understand your friends who's who. It's amazing. That's the power of shape. A bad shape, an ugly shape, an unreadable shape happens when you noodle like this, and it becomes a road map.
Steven Silver calls it road mapping.
Morgan Weisling calls it road mapping too. It's road mappy. That's an ugly shape. Whenever you put a shape in your painting, and paintings are made of hundreds or thousands of shapes, right? You are asking the audience subliminally to read that shape. So basically the idea is don't overburden your audience with too many shapes. One of the great ways to merge shapes is with edges. You can see in this study here, I highly recommend you guys try this. Everyone here can draw a cube. Doesn't matter, I'm sure the least skilled person in this room could draw this cube. Get the values in there, there's 3. There's just the average light, halftone, and you got your shadow. 3 values. And then just play with the edge. And you'd be amazed at the expression you could come up with just by modifying edges. I think my favorite edge is this one here. It's kind of like a firm edge there, then it goes into a soft edge there, then it goes into a lost edge there. The shape is intact though, because remember, X-ray vision, we can still detect the shape, but the edge is playful. Values are rigid. They're fun to work with, but values are the rigid part of painting. Edges are the fun part.
Yeah. If you mess up the values, your painting won't read. But one thing I want to point out with Marco's cube here is that where he lost the edge is where the values are similar. right? Oh, yeah. So right here where the values are similar. And where he kept a crisper edge is where the light is hitting the cube. And that is also, so what is your eye doing when you're merging, when you're losing the edge? You're grouping at the same time, right? You're grouping essentially these two shapes more together. Your eye doesn't focus on that area as much.
It's like the Craig Moulton's clouds thing.
Yes, exactly. Then your eye goes to the area of highest contrast, which is where he has a dark shape there, and then the light part of the edge of the cube there.
Exactly. The eye is a junkie for contrast. Contrast is a drug. The eye is a junkie for contrast. You put the contrast where you want the viewer to look. It couldn't be simpler. But the thing you have to do, and here's the thing where everyone fails. Everyone has trouble with. And I've failed on this many, many times. You have a good focal point. It's great. But the hardest part of painting is not the focal point, because we're all probably pretty good at rendering things. The hardest part is supporting the focal point with everything else.
Yeah, you can ruin the focal point.
You can ruin it. Yeah, like I was doing portfolio reviews yesterday, and everyone, I'm like, okay, I see your focal point. This is where you want me to look. But how come you're like torpedoing your own painting with like all these shapes over here that have contrast and hard edges? Not that you can't use high contrast and hard edges anywhere, but you got to be very selective, because high contrast, value contrast, light, dark, hard edges, they ask the viewer for attention. Yeah. And what you really want to do on a meta level is tell the viewer, hey, pay attention here, right here. Now, this is like an entertainment industry thing. We're all probably geared towards the entertainment industry. We're not like fine artists per se. Entertainment industry is like a movie frame. Boom, it's got to read instantly. Yeah. You have to look here or there, not here and there, because the shot might cut before that, right? And suddenly you're confused. Yeah. It's a subtle change between oh, hey, that's a cool painting. Oh, look at that character there. What you want is this. What you want is, holy crap, I love that. Like that's
especially when you're trying to show your portfolio, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You want to hit the art director, whoever's looking at your portfolio. But which reminds me, I want to this Edgar Payne quote, which I'm not going to quote exactly, but he says, "It takes great ingenuity to select, reject, and design, certain elements in your painting, so you're not just copying exactly from a photo, right?" And what I want to show here is, you guys know who Alfonso Mucha is? He's one of my other favorite painters. I actually recently got this book from Stuart NG, and it has beautiful paintings of some progress of some of his work. This is his line, right? I count that's a structure. He's sort of establishing the structure with line. And then here you can see you're going with value. It's a very simple value structure, right? There's not much detail, because the next slide I'm going to show you is his final piece. But you can see here, just like Marco showed in his 5 value, you have the lights and you have the dark. There's a clear separation and a clear distinction between light and shadow. So I encourage you guys all to squint at the screen in front of you, and you can squint and you can instantly almost see what's happening, right? You don't really need to know you can see there's figures and there's an angel in the back, right? So toggling from this to this, you can see that obviously there's so much more detail. He's pushed foreground values more, right? Talking about value, and he's lightened up the background. He's created more contrast, more drama, more cinema. Is that a word? Yeah. Yeah, that's obviously a word. But the structure from this, obviously the design has changed a bit, right? He still maintained the structure. Mm-hmm. So even when you're adding more complexity and detail in your painting, do not forget the design and structure of your original, thumbnail, whatever it may be.
Yeah, what I love about it is, like, we talk about merging shapes, right? And creating easy passage in groups. It's like the people's pants here. They merge right through this figure. Morgan Weisling, again, one of my painting heroes, talked about, imagine you're a little sailboat. Imagine my mouse is a little sailboat, and I can only sail through channels of similar value. So I can have my little sailboat right here. And look at this. I can sail up here. I think I can sail right through this channel. I can sail right around his butt, down through his head, and kind of into the shadow of his arm, down. Like, I can keep sailing my little boat. Yep. And it's the same up here. Like, I can sail my boat through these values, right down all through here. This is all open sea. I can sail through this. And of course, the contrast, where I can't sail from here to there. That's too much of a contrast jump. You want to be able to sail your little boat through your painting as much as possible, and only interrupt your sailboat when you want to draw attention to that place. Everything else can be softened. So, like, even here, what I love is, like, the highest contrast is where the face is. Yep. But this figure down here, like, this fairly good contrast, like fairly high contrast.
It kind of it lets your eye kind of go there and then go around again.
That's right. But the eye, being a junkie for contrast, is still more addicted to this part than that part. So he's done the thing that I said is very difficult, which he has a very strong focal point. That's easy. But what's hard is he has rendered a beautiful figure there, but he's made it less than the focal
It's still
point.
subordinate
That's right.
to the focal point. I don't know how much time we have left in this section. 9 minutes. I want to talk really quick about matrix studies. What do you think, Marco?
Yeah, do it.
Have any of you guys ever done matrix studies before? Yes or no? Raise your hand. Ooh, like 2 people.
I haven't either.
Oh, really? Okay. So this is something that I love to give to my students. And matrix studies is basically working with 2 values, not 3. So almost forget the 5 value thing for a second. And how are you going to simplify your design into 2 values? So for example, this is one I did and I should have put the original Edgar Payne painting, but I simplified this Edgar Payne painting into 2 values just to really capture what the focal point of that painting is, which in this case it's a wave. Now here it'd be a little bit more complex where he has the patterns of the light and dark shapes, and I might be going too complex in the light and dark versus light and shadow. But how can you still create a readable image with 2 values? And I love this exercise because going back to what Marco was talking about with shapes, it really forces you to create simple, readable shapes because you only have 2 values. So this is a really fun exercise. You can see here are some examples. On the left is the original image of Edgar Payne, and on the right, it's almost problem solving how you can create a design. I'm curious to know what your thoughts on these are.
What I love about these shapes, this is a great example of what I would call beautiful shapes versus unreadable shapes. Like I love how, so on this diagram here, and I've never seen this diagram, it's my first time seeing it. You see how you've identified this like a rectangle shape, right?
My student work, by the way, not me.
Oh, nice. Well, it's well done. You see this rectangle shape that's here? That's like the fundamental DNA of the shape.
Yep.
But in the study, and this is true of the final painting, the student has noticed these little triangles that have cut into the shape. Just create, it's like the overlay of big, medium, small, right? The rectangle is the big shape, and you just cut into it with little small shapes, but the DNA of the rectangle is unchanged because we have X-ray vision. We know what's there. Now, if you cut into your shape too much, then the shape gets destroyed. So it is a push and pull game.
It's exactly, I love that you brought the push and pull analogy because how I like to look at it too is like on one side you're pushing detail and complexity, and on the other side simplicity. So when is your painting needing to be pulled towards simplicity, where it's like we need to go back to those basic shapes, rectangles, squares, and then where can you add a little bit more detail where you can cut into the shape, make it a little bit more unique and specific, right? Kwang Ho told me that.
Yeah, no, that's a good one.
I'm pulling up all the fine art.
Yeah, what else do you have on that? That's a good
let's see
one.
what else. Here's another one, right? So here's I think it was like a 5 or 6 value. I keep forgetting. I didn't do this, by the way. It's a figure study, right? Now here I've simplified it into 2 values. The next one from the left. And on the third one, I'm showing you how all the shapes I'm trying to put down, like Marco said, are simple S-curves and straights. The very right is what happens when you just break up everything for the sake of shapes,
Yeah,
and
that's
there's
great.
no design to it whatsoever.
That's awesome. The shape is gone
The
on
shape
the
is
right.
gone, and the readability is gone.
Yeah.
You don't really know. If I were to not show you the original blueprint, maybe you wouldn't know that's a figure, right? So that's how important shapes are, because how I look at it is that every stroke you put down is a shape, whether it's a dot. Study Nikolai Lockertsen, study all the painters. A dot can make such a difference in your painting. So you really want to put care into every shape, whether it's big, medium, or small. Really take care in designing them.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would say is let's use the word wrong. It's a harsh word, but what's wrong about this is not only is the shape sort of equally broken up and therefore unreadable, the big shape becomes unreadable. Every shape here is basically the same size, and that's ignores my whole thing about big, medium, small shapes.
Yep.
If you
That's
have,
why I did it.
yeah, like if every shape is the same volume, you might say the volume of the shape. The shape is the same volume roughly if you measured it. That's terrible design because it just bores the viewer.
Another thing I was trying to do was place the shapes all together kind of the same distance, which is also boring.
Yes.
So it's like they're all the same size and also all kind of cramped together, and there's not really a variety of distance between them or proportion, like Marco said.
Yeah, because of course your negative shapes are shapes too, right?
Yep.
What did you want to move on to from there?
It's up to you.
Okay, we're still talking about shapes and values. So let
How
me
much
just
more time? I don't know.
go ahead, just push this button here. 5 minutes on shapes and values.
Okay.
The thing that's just very quick, this is super quick. You might be like, okay, with only 5 values, like how do you get a complex image? Well, things have different local values, obviously. So like the dark sphere and the light sphere are 2 different local values. And within those local values, you have the 5 value system. You have average light, halftone right there, shadow, reflected light, which I don't think I've mentioned yet, being a hair lighter than the average shadow. And the light sphere is the same. Average light, halftone, average shadow, reflected light, all being, the light sphere is transposed up. Like anyone plays music here, it's like changing keys in a song.
Yep.
That's how you can get a complex painting. So your painting still could have hundreds of values, but every object has a 5-value structure.
And can I just mention something?
Yeah, right.
A thing that I'm sure you noticed too as well, Marco, is that another reason why sometimes paintings might not work is that a lot of times people make the reflected light too light, right? And the reflected light is part of the shadow. Yeah. So going back to what we talked about, always being clear about what is in your light family and what is in your shadow family. If you guys don't have this book, I highly recommend you get this book, Painting with Light and Color by Kevin McPherson. Yeah, he really breaks down the anatomy of color mixing, and traditional oils, but it all coincides with digital painting as well, I think.
Yeah, so this is a painting I did. Now, you can see how the light, she's lit from the right, and then the shadows on the left, right? So we have a clear separation of value. Now, with practice, you will be able to see value through the color. For those who are uncomfortable with that, just set up a filter that switches it to grayscale and check your values as you work. This light on the tip of her face there, that's not shadow. That's a rim light. That's a second light source. So ignore that, because that can be lighter than the shadows and as light as the lights because it is light. But if you look at her cheek right here, that's reflected light because the light, is probably coming down from whatever auditorium she's in. Her face is in shadow there because the direct light is not hitting it, but the ambient light's coming down, hitting her cheekbones, which kind of face up, and you get that slightly lighter reflected light. But when you put in reflected light, just like you said, Tiffany, it's got to be just a hair lighter than your average shadow, or else it risks crossing that fence and the families of light and shadow start fighting. And yeah, it's one of the most common ways people ruin their paintings, and I've fell into that trap many times, many times. Yeah. Now it's like inherently wrote in my head. Like I just know, like, okay, I'm doing reflected light, don't paint it too light. Scott Christensen taught me that basically the job of a painter in terms of value is you should always know what value you're in. And in my head, I kind of do it literally when I paint, just subconsciously, my brain's like reflected light, average shadow, highlight. And like I just know what camp I'm in because that tells me what value I should be in. Study it with spheres, boxes, simple geometry that anyone can draw, and then when you're more confident, then apply it to a portrait or whatever you want to paint.
Because all these things are constructed from simple, planes and stuff.
You can see like her nose is basically a box. I was not even trying to hide it. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that's actually maybe. Do you want to do a lead into color?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think so. Maybe you guys are wondering, well then, if my reflected light and my shadow are the same value, then how do I create visual color interest within the shadow family, within the light family, right? So this is what Marco and I both love to do. I see it in Marco's work all the time. And it's shifting color temperature or even slight hues within, and I can't stress this enough, within your shadow family or your light family. So for example, Marco said he always has it in his head, right? And this is a great example here in Marco's painting where in the shadow of his little monster, or big monster, you see, he has greens, right? But then he also shifts it slightly to a teal blue. So it becomes a more blue-green versus here it becomes, in some areas, becomes a more yellow-green. But it's all the same value and it's all clearly in the shadow. So a lot of times when people are trying to add color in their paintings, one of the things I notice the most is that they kind of throw color of the wrong value for the sake of adding saturation or color. And again, that breaks the whole structure and the whole value and the design and the value structure of the painting. But here in Marco's painting is a clear delineation of what the light and shadow is. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the thing with color is, first of all, color can only be functional in your painting if your value, the overall composition structure.
You guys have all heard that quote before, right?
Yeah. Which quote?
Your value, there's so many variations.
Yeah.
Your color is only as good as the value of the color, or
something like
color
that.
Color takes all the credit, but value does all the work.
There it is. That's a good one. Yeah. I love that. Okay, so if we were to quickly break this down in one sentence, what's the structure? It's a big V. The point of the V is here, and it's a big V shape, right? That's the structure I had in mind. In fact, sometimes in my paintings, I'll put the V on the canvas and just paint from there. Now, we're talking about color now. Okay. But I also want to say, value-wise, the monster is in a cave, and the sunlight is kind of shining a bit through the cave, hitting his belly. See that like triangle shape? It's kind of like an arrowhead type shape. See how simple that is? The rule I use in my mentorship classes and my other painting classes is, imagine a child with scissors and you give the child the task of cutting out your shapes. Could they do it? I think a little kid could cut out that shape. It's a very simple shape. Now, don't give kids scissors. At least when you do, don't tell them I said to do it. But if the kid can't cut out the shape, probably the shape is too complex. Just imagine a child cutting out your shape. If they can do it, you're probably on the right track. Now, that's how I'm separating light and shadow of the monster. And of course, the values are very different categories. Light is very light, shadow is very dark. I'm keeping that. Even here, this is halftone, where the belly is just...
That's still in the light.
Still in the light. The belly is just turning under, so the value gets a bit darker, but not nearly as dark as the shadow. Now, as Tiffanie was saying, in the shadows, for example, shadows are amazing because that's where all the reflected light is. That is, sun bouncing off the ground and up, skylight coming down. That's where, to me, where all the color is. And I'm just make one more point, and you can take it from here.
I love playing with color and shadow.
Yeah. So to me, the sun, and I'll make one more point, and then you can take it.
For it.
The sun, or whatever your direct light is. Like for me, it's this direct light shining on my face right now. Here in this painting, it's the sun. The direct light is a bully because the light is so strong, it forces the other colors to be like it. It's like a schoolyard bully. The sun, being a mid-afternoon, quite warm, orangey sun, whatever color that is, wants all the colors it hits to be oranger, to be more like it. The shadow is free to roam because the shadow has the influence of so many other aspects. It doesn't have the bully. That's why it's in shadow. The sun is not hitting it. So it's got the sky. It's got the indirect bounce from the sun. There are so many weaker light sources that aren't bullies because none of them are very strong. They're all kind of mingling. It's like a party of color in the shadow. So in the shadow is where you can play with so many colors. And basic logic would tell me that, well, the part of his belly that's facing up, well, you're going to get bluer because it's a blue sky. So if the monster is green, quote unquote green, I'll just shift to a bluer green.
Math.
Yeah, for this reflected light on the belly. Underneath here, the sun is bouncing.
Bounce light.
Yeah, bouncing down, bounce light, coming back up. There's no skylight there. The skylight is way too weak to bounce off the ground. But sunlight is very strong, bouncing off the ground. So you warm up the bottom. So it's almost like the local color can start you off. You can see like the little study at the bottom. The simplified study is kind of representative of how I think about it. You can start with a base color and then just start shifting from that base color. And what's amazing about color is you can stray quite far from a base color and it still looks like a green monster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the bounce light here. You can see Marco really pushed it, but it works because the value is correct, right? And he really pushed that warmness, and that warm contrast with the cooler local color of the monster. So I love that analogy that you have with the bully and the sun. A lot of times people think, oh, shadows are gray. I always have this, some of my students, the first task I give them is to paint an apple. Super easy, right? And a lot of times in the sunlight, they'll make at the shadow of the apple gray. And you're forgetting the bounce light of the apple onto the white. I put on a white surface, onto the white surface. The shadow catches that, right? And then the bounce light of that white surface bounces a little bit up into the apple. Oh, of my paintings? Okay. I have a Edgar Payne painting. I guess I don't know. Okay. Okay. So like this painting that I did, for example, like Marco Bucci.
It's so weird when I hear my last name.
I said that. Like Marco said, the light, when it hits something, it tends to blow something out, right? But here what I attempted to do was I still think I have more color in my shadow. You can see here, I'm pushing it slightly warmer here. Can you guys see the cursor? And then as you go up, it gets a little bit more cooler with a little bit hints of yellows and greens, more of the yellow greens. So I'm slightly shifting in color temperature whilst maintaining the same value. And then here, what I'm trying to do in the light part, right? I could easily just pick a light yellow and then just sort of make the rocks light yellow everywhere. But what we both love to play with is like, how can you play with complementary? So what I always do is I actually pick the complementary color of whatever the local color of the rock is, and I'll infuse little bits of purple, even little bits of like hints of red. As long as it doesn't overpower the whole painting, that's how you can make your painting kind of sing in the next level.
Mm-hmm. And to add to that, I love this painting by Tiffanie. So that purple in the rock kind of like logically doesn't make sense. Like a rock is not purple.
Yeah.
But and I bet if you were standing in this location, you probably wouldn't see that purple there.
You wouldn't.
You wouldn't, yeah, because it wouldn't happen. But what Tiffany's doing that makes that work, first of all, the value's good, the shape is good. That's number one. But in terms of color, she's also using purples in the shadows in more saturated purples because well, the sky being blue. You can't see the sky, but it's obviously blue because it's a sunny day in the California or whatever. The blue sky would be mixing with like the reds of the rock, creating like a purple. So in shadows, she's making this purple in the light work by going more saturated, like these purples here, more saturated with that same purple, but in the shadows. So it kind of links it. It kind of says, hey, I'm using the same color, but in shadows, it's like that color identity being a purple, we can exaggerate it because it's in shadow, it's motivated by the skylight. But hey, I'm going to play with that same purple and light because it's like a little game you're playing here. You're playing with that same purple and light, but you're keeping it grayer. And we got to talk about grays.
Yeah, I was thinking of showing the complete opposite of the Edward Seago. Marco talked about the same point, a great point about tying your colors in like that, right? And now I'm going to go the opposite way. One of my favorite artists, I show a lot of fine artists because I come from a traditional background as well as he does, but this is one of my favorite paintings by Edward Seago. Complete opposite. Grays, right? And, you know, grays often get the bad rep, like, oh, how do I not mix muddy colors? And there's this one wonderful quote by Charles Hawthorne where he says, you know, sometimes the most beautiful colors on your canvas are nothing but mud on your palette. And it's really all about how you pair your colors together and how you pair them in, you know, the right relationships, right? So in this painting, and I'll just jumpstart it, and I would love to hear your thoughts. You know, there's so much color in the shadow. Like, to me, it feels vibrant. I don't know about you guys. It feels vibrant for one because there's beautiful contrast here between the building and the water. And I want you guys to notice, going back to structures, we can't help to talk about that. Look at how he groups the glistens here. And then he has smaller dots, just every stroke is a shape there, but those shapes do so much to elicit the glisten in the water. Here, he has beautiful grouping in the boats, right? When you squint, and I encourage you guys to always squint, look at the beautiful grouping in the boats. He chooses to infuse less detail, pointing your eye towards the center where there's most detail. Even that person right there is almost blended into the background, right? Because your eye wants to go here where it's at that most alluring area. And even though, you know, the building is kind of basically all the same value, he still manages to infuse interest and a little bit of contrast through hue and color temperature shifts.
Mm-hmm. Let's just quickly talk about the gray thing. So here, being at Lightbox at my table, you know, people have seen my YouTube channel, and I talk about grays a lot. And I have a color wheel here. There it is. Let's bring that up.
Ah, yes.
So the thing that's magic to me, and this another thing that revolutionized my own paintings, is every color has gray in common. Everything like reduces itself in saturation back to gray. And then, of course, it's at its most saturated at the outer ring here. When you have colors in these inner rings, maybe even the first three, I would say, the first three inner rings, but especially the first two, when your colors are within those inner rings, you almost get harmony by default because gray is there in everything. It's a common denominator. There, thank you. It's a common denominator of every color within the first two rings. So if you just want auto harmony, paint in grays, but don't just use one. Like, don't just pick like this color and paint that. That'll look monochromatic. Use all the colors if you want. That's I think that was what the last piece we just saw.
Yeah, you used all of them.
I think they're all there. In fact, check this out. As long as you're, I don't know what folder it's in. As long as it's probably here. As long as your values are worked out. Of course, I can't find it. Sorry, guys. Back to the color wheel. Start with grays. Get instant harmony, and then what you can do is you can pick one or two hues and just branch out a little bit. Branch out. And what Tiffanie was doing in that cliff painting, in light, she was using that purple that we just talked about, right? That purple was maybe about here, and then in shadow, the purple was here. And that's a great way of harmonizing your painting. So she was like, hey, I'm playing with this purple in the light. Maybe I should also use that same purple more saturated in the shadow. And there's a link there. Your eye detects the link, and that link registers as beautiful to us because there's something about being able to track the colors relationships. It's not the color you're choosing. It's the relationships.
It's all about the relationships.
And when you use grays, you are instantly relating them.
Yeah.
So that is the thing that I find super helpful. And is it structure? Well, I had anyway, sorry.
Which one are you trying to find?
Never mind. Go ahead. Keep going.
Oh.
Do that one.
That one? So here's an example of one of my gouache paintings, just to link off of what Marco was talking about. It seems very saturated, right? But I'm actually using a lot of grays because I actually am tied to more attracted to paintings with, you know, obviously a good amount of gray. Like Marco said, it ties it together. So in order to pop the saturation in the tops of the trees, I actually have to infuse more gray. So the greens right here, I mix a little bit of red burnt sienna in them, right? And then even here, all the trees in shadow, you can see those are very desaturated greens, you know. And in order to do that, I mix its complementary color, which is a version of burnt sienna or alizarin crimson, in order to get that contrast and saturation. So, and obviously the house itself is in shadow and affected by skylight. So I'm also, you know, desaturating that blue a little bit. So that's an example of how you can pair your colors together to really create that vibrancy.
Mm-hmm. In my mind, there are basically 4 ways of navigating the color wheel. On the top, these guys here, stereotypical warm versus cool colors, right? I mean, I learned about that in like 3rd grade art school. These are warm colors, these are cool colors. And that's true. But that's kind of useless if you don't know how to navigate between them. Right. And there are basically 4 ways to do it. You can use the top one, which is just keeping the same saturation and just moving your way around the color wheel. This is obviously a very crude way to do it, and it's not very appealing, but it is a way to do it. The second one is the same thing, just going the other way, going through the greens instead of through like the violets to get from yellow to blue. And the yellow and blue is just my kind of stereotypical warm and cool. This could be any warm and cool color. The third path is where we start talking, because the third one uses the gray. The third one just goes right, desaturates the yellow, hits perfect gray right there, and bounces back out into the blue. This is more what nature does. The fourth one is really what nature does, and it combines, in this case, the fourth one combines the first one and the third one. As we move to gray, we're also moving toward the reds, away from the yellows. And then as we come out toward the blue, we're actually hitting a few different hues along the way, like some of the violets and ultramarines as we get into the blue.
Can I just say something about the top line? The first row, right, where he was just navigating along the outside of the wheel, right, where all the colors are most saturated. All the colors feel like they're fighting with each other. Like, I like to equate it to like babies screaming in a room, and like, you don't know where to attend to. You know, they're all vying for attention. But the last 2 rows, there's like an area of rest, right, visual rest, where there's grays, and your eyes like, I don't know, I literally want to sigh back, it's so nice, like nice pastel colors. And then you can, so that's how you build up, it's like crescendo, decrescendo, you know, or something for you guys who do music or anything. But I love that area of just contrast and desaturation, saturation, but still having so much color.
Mm-hmm. So if you're painting in your light family and your light is like the sun and you're painting these warms, you know, the light being a bully, you might be probably mostly within this range. But like what Tiffanie was doing with that purple, in this case it would be blue in this chart, she'd be like, you know what, I'm gonna go a little bit into the blues and pick that guy right there. And I'm gonna put that in the light. Yeah. But then to pay for that decision, you need to say, okay, I need to show that color in its more true form, its more saturated form in shadow, to show the viewer what the link is. And that's color. Now it's difficult in practice because there's so many colors and people pick one. People have trouble picking them. This is one of my students did an assignment where that's a photo of an apple on the right, and the student painted this study. It's perfectly fine. It's a functional painting. It looks 3D. It's functional
because the values are okay.
Yeah, values and shapes are fine.
Right.
It's fine.
But how do you push it?
So I'm like, okay, and this was the critique I did. I did that, and I'm like, and the student asked me but those colors aren't there. I'm like, you're right. They're not there. But the relationships allow this to happen. This blue in shadow can only work because first of all, I'm playing with getting up to that blue. Like, see these little areas here where there's some grays and some purples, and I'm kind of flirting with that blue, and then boom, I'll hit you with it because I've led up to it. If that blue were just, like, if you just stuck that blue here, it wouldn't work.
Right.
You have to lead yourself up to it. And in my paintings, I love doing that. I love playing with the grays, those first few rings of color, and then just sneaking my way up, and then boom, I'll hit you with something.
You know what that reminds me of really quick? I don't have an example, but Nikolai Lockertsen does this. You guys all who know Nikolai, are you guys familiar with his work? He's a fine artist, and he does this where he'll paint in all these grays, and then he'll hit, and then he'll put a dab of primary color, and it just works because all the grays have those primary colors, right? Because how do you mix grays? By mixing red, blue, and yellow together. So it all works like that in harmony, and I think it's so fascinating. Oh, yeah, I wish I had that example, but I guess I don't have, let me go back to this. And for example, let's say, I think I gotta, for example, the top left, Bato Dugarzapov, all the shadows, you know, in the house, first there's a clear delineation of light and shadow. And before we talk about edges, right, I want to just zoom in really quick. Oh, thank you, to the top left one. Yeah. And I want you guys to notice just the beautiful edge delineation, right? The crisp edge right here, and then how he almost loses it. And this whole mass right here, even though there's separate things like the house, the ground, the house, and the back, it all merges together. It's not reality. He's painting something beyond reality, and he's also really pushing some of the bounce light on the house, the ambient cooler light from the sky onto the ground plane, maybe some foliage right here. So he's pushing past reality.
Can I interject with one thing there?
Of course.
You said something interesting. You said that's not reality, and I agree. But here's where it actually is reality, and I'll make a point.
I know.
When you're looking at something, your eye focuses on the thing you're looking at. So I'm looking at you. Hi. I can see you. I can see your glasses, your mask, your hair. I can see you because that's how eyes work. I can't see you because my eye doesn't work that way. So that's where this is very realistic. It's not realistic photographically. It's realistic to your experience because when you're looking at a focal point, which is what a painting's all about, you can't, which the focal point is here, highest value contrast, hardest edges. You can't see this. If this were a real life scene and you were looking here, you would not be able to see where this changed into grass. It would melt away. So photorealism is awesome, but when you're painting, you can paint photorealism, it's great, but if you want to paint something that feels truer to your visual experience of life, you have to lose things because your eye, when I'm looking at you, I can't see anyone else. Right. There's 100 people in this room. I can only see one person at a time. That's how your eye works. Sorry,
actually, I'll pull up one of my, just to illustrate that. For example, here, the cityscape I did, I don't actually see all the people behind, right? So I was losing them and trying to figure out how I could create the impression of people while not, you know, actually painting all the detail in that painting. So that's just a really quick example of what Marco was talking about. Do you want to show one on your slide?
Open up for questions.
Yeah, I think we should open up for questions. That's about.
Anyone who has a question, feel free to use that mic. Come on up. While someone comes up, we can maybe keep talking. We'll see.
That was a quick boot camp on structure.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's seen graphics like this where you have it's the same gray, right? But compared to what's next to it, because gray harmonizes everything. Gray represents motion. So like against this blue here. Oh no, feel free to go to the mic. Against that blue, that gray is moving warm. Right? Because think of blue on the color wheel. Well, that gray is moving toward like a red, let's say, or a yellow, so it looks warmer.
Yeah, that video you had. Do you guys remember Marco Bucci's video where...
You said my full name again.
Damn it. I'm so used. I don't know why. I don't do that at the... We're tabling next to each other. I don't say it. It's just here. I don't know why. So, for example, you guys picture the color wheel. Okay, let me try to explain this. I learned from
and then we'll get to the question.
Orange is a complementary of blue, right? So they're on opposite sides of the color wheel. Let's see if I do this right, Marco. Okay, so when you are traveling towards the center, which is gray, right? You're automatically traveling towards the orange, which is on the opposite side of blue.
So it looks orange.
So it looks and feels more orange. If you do this in Photoshop where you take a saturated blue, put it on your canvas, then you drag the same hue down to the, we use the hue cube, so to the left side where it's more desaturated, and you put that color next to that more saturated blue, it will feel a little bit more orange. It's just your eye playing tricks on you.
And you don't even have to get into the oranges. You just got to go toward orange.
Exactly.
Your eye detects the motion, the path, not the color.
Yeah, you don't actually have to shift the hue towards orange.
All right, this gentleman has a question.
So it's kind of a question, a few givens, right? There needs to be many shapes in a painting, and that takes time. But there's also a lot of difficulty in making those shapes work. So when you are creating shapes, do you use brushes and brush work to define shapes, make your own brushes in order to get those shapes in easier? Or do you use techniques like lasso tool and other focal points and just take that time in order to define those shapes?
Good question. I'll do my answer and then we'll move. Yeah, so I'm a fan of custom brushes. I mean, if you look at me work in Photoshop, I do have hundreds of brushes, but honestly, I use like 4 of them on my day-to-day. And for me, control is actually more desirable than like Photoshop doing the thing, because when I can control the shape, well, I can draw exactly what I want, right? But if there are times where I'm working within a passage of like a grouped passage of similar values, then I'll go crazy with brushes because I know that if I'm in one value or a very similar group of values, I have free reign. That's where I bring out the custom brushes. But honestly, I use like a dry brush or a round brush that allows me to very precisely control the shape. What do you do?
I really like to limit my brushes. For Marvel right now, they have an awesome brush where it's like a graphic brush, and I literally use that for like every painting that I do. And it just allows you to get nice, clean edges. And then we both paint the same way for a personal work, we paint on one layer. So we're able to carve, and I like to use the analogy of like carving into your shapes. I'm a fan of simple, hard edge brushes because that's how you get clean shapes. Yeah. And then smudging.
Then smudging,
Yeah.
That's what we do anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
It's not like a question precisely. It's like, could you please come back to the color wheels and like description of this, like 4 types of them? That was something new for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you go back to the mic? What you said? Go back to the color wheel and do what?
So those 4 types of
Oh, that. Yep.
color values.
Yep. Let's go here.
Could
This
you
one.
go over them once again? Like.
Oh, sure. Okay. So the top one, we're going from a warm, which is the yellow on the left, to a cold, which is the blue on the right. That's just the 2 warm and cool colors I picked. Like they're kind of diametrically opposite, right? But it can be any warm and cool, like a medium saturation orange to a medium saturation blue, right? The first one keeps the same saturation and goes through every color along the way. So you're gonna hit, if you're going from yellow, you're gonna hit orange, you're gonna hit red, you're gonna hit violet, and on your way to blue with equal saturation. This is kind of too candy colored. The second one does the same thing, but just goes the other way on the color wheel, which then goes through the greens, right? The third one only goes through the gray. So if we brought up an actual color wheel, let's do it really quick. Sorry, guys. Oh, wait, here. The third one does this. Here's your yellow. It goes like this, right through the gray into, well, I went to blue, but you can go to violet, whatever. It goes right through the gray. Actually, I'll bring that up again. So that's the third path. The fourth path does this. Follow my mouse, okay? Kind of does this. Goes through here, and it kind of goes like that. I think of gray, and I've put this in my videos so many times, gray is like a gravity well. As you pass from one color to another that goes through the gray, so from the yellow to the violet or the blue, has to go through gray, right? The gravity of the gray sucks it in, so it's going to go like this. It's going to go like that through, or I guess if you're going through the reds, it's going to go like, like that. That gravity is going to pull it in before releasing it here. It's like, think of like planets orbiting or something. And you can't get away from that gravity well. Now, if you're just shifting from yellow to orange, like in sunlight, well, then the gravity well doesn't take effect because you're just going next door neighbors. You can just do that. But if you want to go from a saturated yellow or a saturated orange to a blue, you can't do this. Well, not in a realistic painting because nature never does that. You have to go through the gravity well. So that's what I'm showing in, that's what I'm showing in the diagram here. Oh, well, if I can ever pull it up again.
Yeah, so in his yeah.
Yeah, here we go. So you can see, like Tiffany said, it feels like there's a sigh of relief in these bottom ones. The gray just relaxes and like it feels nice, like the colors are coming together before breaking apart again. Whereas the top two, it feels like, like a Disneyland candy cane or something.
Yeah. The top one would be like if you're just traveling along the outside of a color wheel, the outside ring, everything is at its utmost saturation. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
I like that gravity well thing.
Anyone else question? Okay.
Don't be shy.
Feel free to form a line.
Yeah.
Oh, you can go first.
You guys can form a line.
Yeah, you should form a line just so it's easier.
Yeah, just so we know.
Thanks, guys.
I wonder what your creative process is. Like when you have a reference photo, it may not be perfectly fitting a good design. How you like tweak it into one, or do you create something completely from imagination? And then how do you find, or do you even find reference photo to support your design? Thanks.
I would say for both of us, we plein air paint a lot, and I think that, at least for me, and I know for Marco, has really helped in kind of having a mental library of different lighting scenarios in your head. So when I find reference photos, or even when I'm doing my gouache paintings or digital paintings, they're obviously not perfect, right? Because literally photos suck out like 80% of the color that you saw on the spot. So I really depend, for me, on my mental library to push, and it also just comes with, like, after you do hundreds of paintings, you know where you can, oh, I think I can add like a hint of saturation. Oh, I think I could tone this down, or I think I could push this to a warmer hue. And you kind of, it becomes intuitive. So I would say I rely on photos for the bare minimum, like maybe something inspires me, like, oh, I like the way the diagonal is here, or I like the shape of the mountains. And then I might completely change the color and the shadow and light ratio.
Yeah, I mostly look at reference to see how something looks. Like if I'm unfamiliar with like how a warship looks, I'll use reference to say, oh, like it's got the hull is curved here and it's got a point there. And the photo might stimulate a little bit of creative energy in terms of its color, but I always, like Tiffany said, think about my experience painting from life, which is really where you download the information for yourself. I'm like, okay, the photo is lying to me about these colors because that's what snapshots do. And I'm like, I can see the warm and cool in the photo, but I will push it. Just like my Apple example, where I'll notice the patterns that the photo's giving me, but I'll exaggerate it. Like almost like a caricature artist exaggerates a face. Yep, go ahead.
All right, just help me piece this together a little bit because that was a very informational hour. So you're talking about how the sun, like the light, is a bully, right? So what isn't in light and is more desaturated, and is that why you say there's more options to put different colors in like shadow because there's just the desaturation from the light, from the lack of light?
Shadows are not always more desaturated.
Are you asking if the light is desaturated or the shadow?
The shadow being desaturated, does that like offer you more options for color? Because you were talking about how it has more influence.
So the light, whatever the temperature of the light is, be it an orange sun or maybe a green spotlight, that'll direct everything to be toward what that color is, right? Okay. And then within that color, you can play a little bit, like a little more green, a little less green, maybe green's neighbor, which might be like an orange, a yellow color, right? You can go into that a little bit. Then in terms of saturation, yeah, you can just play. You can have a little less, a little more. Then the shadows will be totally a result of the ambient light. One thing we didn't get into, people will say like, oh, warm light creates cool shadow. Not really. You can start there, and the reason people say that is because there's a blue sky. And yeah, a blue sky does create cool shadow. But what if you have a sunlight that's really warm, bouncing? Well, that's going to warm up your shadow, right? So the thing with color, when you think about grays, gray is not a color, it's a concept. So when you were painting with gray and you're moving that gray through different hues, you're using grays, plural, grays, right?
Yeah, warm and cool.
Yeah, you can use like a slightly warmer gray, like an orange gray. You can then use a slightly cooler gray, a bluish gray or a violet gray. And your gray desaturated shadow won't look desaturated, just like that painting you showed with the Venice thing. Mm-hmm. It actually still looks colorful because that color is moving. Yeah. And because they're all connected via grays, it actually won't look gray, it'll look colorful. I hope that answers.
Yeah.
And another thing is, I don't know what you think about this, but I don't think the shadow necessarily always needs to be more desaturated than the light. Like in my painting, sometimes the sunlight will blow something out. So when you're mixing white in, white always desaturates, by the way. So when you're mixing white in, that color actually, it might be a warm color, but it's also more desaturated than something less in the shadow where you can really push the bounce light. So a lot of people think, oh, shadows are always gray and they're always more desaturated. And you can almost, it's the opposite. Like my light is almost white. I'm mixing, I'm putting in like a really, really light green and a really, really light purple. But where I have all my color and more saturation comparatively in this painting is in the shadows.
And you can think about that as a general structure. Think, okay, I'm going to be a little less saturated with my lights and then more saturated in my shadows.
Yeah.
That'll create a nice relationship, and that's what Tiffany is doing here. Or you can go the opposite. I'm going to be more saturated in my lights and less saturated in my shadows.
Exactly. Choose that.
Yeah, you don't have to, but that could be a structure you work within.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
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 Hi.
So it's about color harmony. Mm-hmm. So from experience, sometimes there is a painting or your painting, the blue, it feels to like straight from the tube or straight from the
tube.
palette.
Yeah.
And it ruined the whole harmony. How you control that?
Like a blue straight from the tube?
Like for the sky or something?
From the sky.
Oh,
for
okay.
example, like the eyes is blue, and you put blue on it.
Oh, I see.
It just too
that
instant. Like
yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I think that could be a result of you jumping to saturation too quick.
Yeah.
And what that does is ignores you haven't earned your way there. You have to earn your way to saturation. If you just put a saturated color, it dies. The effect is not the same because there's no link. There's no
The
tether
lane.
to the gray, you know?
What I've also learned is that there's almost never anything that is like full saturation unless you're dealing with like flowers or, you know, those really bright colors like opera pink or something. So every time I think something's like, oh, that's a real, like the ocean, it's a blue, and I like slap down a really saturated blue, it immediately
Yeah.
doesn't work because there's actually a lot of like yellows and greens and all this other stuff mixed in.
Yeah.
So I hardly ever put like a full saturated color in. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, but let's say like, where's that, those 4 paintings you had?
Oh, right there.
Oh yeah. Let's say, let's look at the top right. Let's say you did want to use a really saturated blue. Like let's say that shadow is really saturated blue. And I said you didn't earn your way there, right? Well, to earn your way there, you got to put those blues in the light. See those little blue hints?
Yeah.
Those are not blue, like kind of greenish blue anyway.
Yeah.
Those are just grayer warms, and those grayer warms are wanting to go toward the blue. That's how Edgar Payne has earned that blue. He's even in the light, he is kind of just like Tiffanie did with the purple in her rocks. He is going that way in other places of the painting.
Can you zoom in on the bottom left one? The bottom left one's kind of the opposite, where if you guys can see, the sky might look predominantly blue, but he actually has flecks of the mountain color, the pink, in the sky as
Yeah.
well. That's what helped ties the whole painting together. Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
Hi. When you showed the picture of the canyon with like purple in the rocks, or you had the apple and you put blue on it, how did you make the decision to choose those colors? Was it sort of a playful decision? You just kind of pick anything, or is it a little more informed? Than
You
that?
nailed the word for me, playful.
Okay.
Yeah. My own personality throughout my whole life, I've always wanted to change things like that. I remember my piano teacher when I was a kid yelling at me because I wanted to change the song to the way I wanted to do it. She's like, you don't get to do that yet, you know? But
Yeah,
once
right.
and same with art, I failed some art lessons because I was like, my old art teacher was like, you don't have good craftsmanship. He yelled at me for that. But once I learned good craftsmanship, then the playfulness can come out.
Okay.
I would say for me, it's playfulness and intuition. It's almost like I can feel the color and see it before I even put it down, and then it's just a matter of trying and putting it down and seeing if it works with the rest of the painting. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you.
My question is a little more specific about portrait painting, because I like to do portraits. So I know that the face has like the yellow, the red, the gray. When doing shadows for that, I feel like I'm not going far enough and I don't know where to go when I'm starting to shade those sections of the face. Does it go closer towards the ambient lights, or does it just become a shadow of the yellow, shadow of the red? Whenever I do that, it looks like the person's a candy stripe. And
Right. Good question. So probably what you want to do is favor the color of the ambient light. Favor that in your choices. So like you got the red zone of the face and you got the yellow zone of the face, right? Well, okay. So no. Sorry. Yes, this is a great example because hold on a second. Before we talk about this image, let me just. You want to block in your shadows. Here's what you can try. Block in your shadows with the ambient color. So let's say the ambient color is a blue sky. Block in your shadows just with that blue, okay? Then think about, okay, there's a red zone of the face. Well, now I got to add red back into those blues to honor the local color a little bit. But light always beats local color. Light is stronger than local color. So start with the blue, which could be your ambient light in this theoretical case, and then say, okay, I need to bring back in some reds, which mix with blue, which probably give you a violet, right? Somewhere in between. And do the same with your yellows. What's yellow mixed with blue? Well, that's kind of a grayish color. So maybe go toward the gray a little bit. But then when you do that, just to make it feel less like a sectioned off, like robotic color choice, you have to weave your color. Use a very soft edge, and because your shadows are very similar in value, use soft edges and mix the colors together. Put a little bit of the grayish yellow in the red. Put a little bit of that red up here. That's how you weave color together. This painting here is really dominated by the ambient light. You can see like I'm ignoring local color almost altogether. She's getting a lot of reflected light into her shadows from the ground here, from sunlight bouncing off the ground, transitioning to the light from the sky. In the middle is the transitionary color, which is purple, because between, I'm moving around the color wheel, just like in my diagram, I'm going around the color wheel, but respecting the gray along the way. And what's in between orange and blue? Well, I'm using a violet, but a gray violet to respect the gravity well. So I just said a lot of words, but.
No, that's really great. Like the gray is like the marriage counselor. I don't know.
Yeah, so as an exercise to you personally, start with the ambient color, then add your local color back, but just a little bit, 30%. Yeah.
Could you go back to the apple?
Yeah. This one?
Yeah. So I get like working your way up from red to like blue, like earning that blue, but yellow doesn't fall in between blue and red. What led you to add yellow into there?
Am I pointing, where are you seeing the yellow specifically? Like here?
Yes.
And here?
Yes.
Okay. You notice how gray that yellow is though. So what I'm doing here is gray in comparison, comparison to the red. The red is the most saturated, obviously, the reds. The yellow is comparatively less saturated. So what I'm doing is, and this is a very good question, and I'm guilty of this all the time, I put too much color in my paintings. But what I try and do to earn it, if we're using that term again, I just make it grayer. So if I'm introducing like an alien color into my paintings, just make it grayer because that'll be more likely to harmonize it. So I put that yellow in, hopefully playfully, like the last person was suggesting, but also I'm trying to keep it just a bit grayer so it doesn't subtract too much from the saturated reds. If I made that yellow as saturated as the red, then I could maybe get into some problems because I might get a bit too candy coated.
Right.
But just make it a bit grayer, and you can just have fun with it.
So what he has is like a dominant color, and then everything's like
Yeah.
supporting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not overtaking the main local color or whatever he wants. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, my question is about how do you put the thinking about value when you're doing color at the same time? So, for example, when you're doing the part where this dark side meets the light side, and like the area close to core shadow, we sometimes see people put like really saturated orange color when you have warm light, warm sunlight, and I just wonder what's the thinking behind putting color in that area?
You're talking about right where the transition to shadow is, a very saturated color?
Yes, and I also
Like a glow.
heard people saying like that part should be closer to what the light's color is, and I just wonder what's like that thinking behind it.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Are you talking about like that magic orange ring glow around shadows?
Yeah, but I know it's like not just on skin, because I know that's kind of like a translucent light. I'm not talking about that, but more like on any surface. Can
On
you
the
go back
ground?
to the Eckert painting? Yeah.
Like for example, like you're not doing it here, but like if
Yeah,
you
I
put a
know.
really saturated like orange in your border between light and shadow, is that what you're referring to? Like when people
Yeah.
do that?
I only think that works in certain lighting scenarios, like
Yeah.
sunset. Like that wouldn't work during, maybe not so much during noon.
Well, to me, what it is like it's definitely an art direction choice. Like nature doesn't, like it'll do it a little bit on skin, like you said, but like on a cliff like this, nature wouldn't do that. But as an artist, we can do that. So like, let's say Tiffanie decided to put a really saturated like reddish orange there. To me, what that represents is the sunlight is so blown out that as it's changing to halftone going into the shadow, because halftone is moving away from the light, maybe you get a hint more color there. And if you want,
before it goes into
before it goes into
shadow.
shadow. And because it's darker than this, and because the sunlight is so blown out, maybe you have license then to put in a nice bright red or something. You'll find that artists really only do that when the light is blown out. That's when it has its
Yeah.
greatest effect. If the light is dimmer, then you can't really do that. I think that's more of an effect that helps something look
Yeah.
really bright and blown out.
So
Yeah.
how would we do, usually what's the thinking behind doing the halftone when lighting is not just bright sunlight?
Oh, okay, good question. I actually talk about that in my latest YouTube video that I just uploaded a few days ago. But so check that out. But also, just to answer the question, can I bring up the color wheel really quick?
Yeah, go for it. Trying to see if I had an example.
Oh, sorry, here. So halftone. So let's say you're painting skin, and the skin color is like somewhere here, right? Something like that. Your halftone is still in the light. Skin, let's say skin lit by warm light. Okay, so the skin lit by warm light is going to be in here. Let's just say you're transitioning here and you want to do a halftone. Well, for me, I like a little bit of color movement in the halftone, and because I'm not in shadow, halftone is still in light. I'm just going to pick a neighboring hue and just move it there. I find from painting from life, typically if you're in an orangey color, life, like nature, will give you a reddish color. Like halftones don't go green. Like skin is just not green, right? Halftones are going to go more red because we have blood under our skin. It's going to be more red. But this happens a lot in just like nature scenes too. Like a tree lit by the sun might be, like a yellowy color, and then it's halftone. I'm just going to switch. I'm just going to pick the neighboring hue and switch to that. I don't that's not a scientific explanation, but that's what I tend to see.
I got it. Thank you.
Thank
you. Surprised you haven't kicked us out yet.
Yeah, I think we're
Oh.
overtime.
I think he's here to kick
done?
us out now.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
you
you
guys.
so much, guys, for coming. Hope you guys enjoyed that.
We'll see you around the show, guys. Thank you.